1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, and welcome to the Vininspo podcast with me, Ed Merrison. This is where wine is a travel experience. Join us as we pick up bits and pieces, make new friends, and create memories that make our future interactions with wine, people, and places all the more meaningful and fun. My guest on this week's podcast is Ginny Willcock. Ginny is the chief winemaker at Margaret River's founding estate Vasse Felix, where she's picked up just about every accolade going, including the reigning Halliday Wine Companion Winemaker of the Year during her 19-year tenure. Before we kick off, I'd like to say a big thank you to my Substack subscribers. All of you, yes, but especially to the kindly souls who paid for the privilege. Seriously, any support you show, likes, shares, ratings, subscriptions for this podcast or any Vininspo output makes a big difference to a venture that hopes to make a small difference. Anyway, to the star of the show. Ginny and I spoke about being infatuated by the Zen wine master, happy juice and glory days in Bindoon, Catholic guilt and the importance of living a true story, how looking at a tree through an artist's eyes makes you a better people manager, the heartbreak grape escapade in Albania, fear, hubris, loyalty and trust in the quest for success, Grand Cru consecration by the monks of Margaret River, barrel stacking and self-esteem, King of the North, King of the South and the Queen of Cabernet, cursing, candour and extroverted thinking, and a fantasy glass with a gravelly voiced crooner. I started by asking what kind of kid little Gin had been.
Oh, my perception and my parents' perception might have been two completely separate things. My mum, I think, would have thought me as a, moody tween, annoying. I was the number 2 child. They talk about the second child, or I called myself the middle nobody. So because I was second child and I had an older sister who was only 13 months older and then a brother who was 2 years younger. He was my son who could do no wrong. I was 13 months after my first, my older sister. So I was clearly just got in the way. I was just annoying. So I think that sort of formed my childhood, and I had to become quite independent, and I had to talk a lot and command my own attention. So it made me quite loud.
And that was growing up in Perth.
Yeah.
What do you remember about Perth of the day when you were growing up?
I had the most beautiful childhood, really. We grew up in a place called South City Beach, which was we were 200 metres from the beach. My dad bought it, I think, we were talking about it the other day. He paid something like $8,000 for this little block on a street, which is now considered one of Perth's most expensive streets because it's right near the beach. And it was an island, so we had, it sort of swung around. Swanbourne was to the south. There was big sporting ovals and everything, and then there was Raybould Hill behind us. So it was an island, really. There was no shops. There was only an island of kids about my age whose parents didn't want them inside. It was like, get outside, I don't want to see you till dark, but you need to be home at dark. So we'd go down the beach, we were skateboarding, bike riding. It was complete freedom, really. And as I became a teenager, I think the beach became my solitude, my peace. When I was angry with mum and dad, I'd run to the beach. It didn't matter whether it was winter or summer. Summer was peaceful and winter was wild and woolly, and it took away all that bad energy, So the ocean was a really important part of my upbringing. We had great schoolmates, we had great neighbourhood kids. It was just really glorious, actually.
And what were you like at school? Were you a bit of a ragtag student or were you diligent?
I wasn't too bad at school. It wasn't until I sort of got later school that when things really matter, I started stressing out a bit. I was maths was good, English terrible. And to this day, I still can't speak. I'd love to think English was my second language, but I don't have a first. It's a disaster, really. But I've always just used too many words too often to worry about the perfection of words. So I just use what I can, as many as I can, and hope that I make sense to somebody somewhere,
Well, this might be a test of that. And back then, as well as the beach, the island, I gather the farm was an important place as well. Tell us about Bindoon.
Yeah, so my little sister, who is an informative part of my life these days because she's in the wine industry as well, she was like, 3 years old and I was 11. So she called me the moody teenager and she was the cute little kid. And that was actually a fact. I was a moody teenager. I'd hate to go through being a teenager again. It's an awful time trying to find out who you are, what you're good at. Nobody really knows. I relied quite heavily on art. I loved art and craft. When we go and stay with Grandma, it was always, there was no TV or stuff, but Grandma would get out bloody sewing needles or painting, or that was a beautiful time for me, and I really found really great creative space, just finding things to become or to do. But then when we got to the farm, just a different thing happened for me. It was just this, the earth, the forest, the bush. There was a little river running through. It was only 4 acres of vineyard. It was in a stinking hot place. But I loved animals, and we had a dog, and the dog was happy, and Mum and Dad were happy because they were drinking with their friends. There were 4 partners with their 4 children. Each partner had 4 kids each. So it was 16 kids, 4 lots of adults, and all their friends who used to come up there. We'd work during the day and everyone would, prepare food and prune the vines, and then it was just a big party for adults. And we would all, as kids, like so many of us, just hang in the dormitory and talk and hang. And it just made me feel comfortable, There was always somewhere to escape if you didn't want to be with people, but there was lots of people to be with when you wanted to be with people. It was the perfect balance in life. And you're sort of going, our parents are really happy creating something and drinking happy juice. To me it was just happy juice. And they were the nicest parents you could ever have when they'd had a few drinks. It was like, sure, go and do that. No problems. Everything was just great. So, and it was, we were lucky we had parents who, they didn't drink too much that it became horrible. We had a really beautiful time and it just made life wonderful. I mean, it wasn't even great food. It was just cooking together that made it really special, I think,
Yeah, it sounds like that is an idea of being somewhere that exudes that feeling of being together, that's planted quite a seed and obviously not very long after turned into your studies.
Yeah. Well, it was, angry times. Dad sold the farm without communicating to us as kids, and when you're a child you think you own your parents' assets. I'm not sure if everyone's like that, but clearly we thought we were. And when Dad sold the farm, I was really upset that he didn't involve us in the conversation. And I don't think I as my moody teenager and, coming into my teens, I was highly emotional, and I was just like, Dad, you don't understand what that place means to me. It means more than you can possibly imagine. I was so upset. I couldn't talk to Dad. It was literally like a death in the family, And it wasn't until I think Dad came home one day and he'd found out that you could study winemaking. I wanted to be a vet because I loved animals, I loved plants, zoology or biology or something like that. And then Dad came home with this winemaking and I just went, that's it. It was literally not another thought after that about what I wanted to be. And all my subjects that I chose for year 11 and 12 were the basic subjects that I needed to get in. And the only other subject that I truly loved that I continued was art. And it's funny, a few friends of mine who talk about, matriculation art, which is like everyone thinks that it's, for crazy people who can't actually do maths. But for me, I reckon it's actually something that's a crucial part of education in opening your mind. And I think it's actually probably one of the most critical parts of becoming a manager of people, of crafting different things. You have to have an open mind and you have to look at things differently in order to come up with the right solution. So for me. And brilliantly, I had a fantastic art teacher, so I maintained that as well. And I think that was really informative for me going forward as to who I am today.
Yeah, right. And how does your interest in art manifest itself today?
I'm still very passionate about looking at art. Art moves me, but it was more about the beautiful art teacher that I had that allowed me to say, you know, when you're crafting art and she says, you know, we want you to paint this, how do you see it? And do you really see it just that way? Or is there another way of seeing it? So you're just looking at, you know, it might just be, I guess in the old day, look at a tree. How do you see that tree? Is it just a tree? Does it actually have a form? Does it have faces in it? Is there something moving behind it? It was just the depth and complexity that you could look at one simple object and think of it in so many different ways. And I've used that, I think, when I look at wine, when I look at plants, when I look at people. Most importantly, people, I think, and managing a situation is like, is this situation just that? Or is it actually other things going on around it, inside it, on the surface, within it? And I think that really does help you work as a manager into dealing with people and dealing with objects and creative objects like a fermenting product. Like, am I just seeing the surface of what's happening here, or is there more to it? So I think that's a really important part of how you grow and develop.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of putting it too, and probably says a lot about how your current work has evolved as well. Speaking of the study though, did you feel when you went to Roseworthy that you could see how the creative side and the science side were going to come together? Did you take to Roseworthy like a duck to water?
Oh God, no. No. I learnt how to probably drink more, party harder. I was a good social networker, you could say, at Roseworthy. I was young, you know. I'd literally left school. I'd never experienced freedom away from my parents at that level in an agricultural college full of wild, untamed human beings. It was amazing. So my Roseworthy time was very uninformed. Even though it sent me down a pathway of understanding and learning where to find things out when you need to. I've got the greatest connections in the wine industry because of that university. I had people who believed in me beyond what I believed in myself, you know. Like Pat Ireland was amazing. He would just look at me and shake his head and go, Virginia, you can do more than this. I was an absolutely hopeless student because I was just too interested in partying and having fun and really enjoying the great things of life that this community was offering me, you know. But I think I came out okay. But what I did learn was that you could ring the AWRI, and there was a book called Making Good Wine by Bryce Rankin. And when I came out of university and I was stuck in a, you know, spot at Redgate Wines when I came here in Margaret River, and there was no one helping me, and I'm like, Bryce Rankin, hotline to Peter Lesky at the AWRI, and I'm like, yeah, I can find out anything I want to. But the thing that got me through that was a curious mind, and the adventure of not wanting to fail, wanting to make sure that I understood the journey of every nuance of what was happening in the wines.
And what about your peers? Obviously, you were good at social networking, somewhat euphemistically, but also obviously you made lifelong friends as well. Who did you come across there that you stayed in contact with and who may have been sounding boards as your careers developed?
Well, Steve Pannell, big brother, he's the Zen master of wine. I looked to Steve. Whenever he'd speak about wine, he was infatuating. He spoke about it on such a level that I could relate to. He used to tell me off all the time for not studying hard enough and failing miserably at quite a few subjects. But we still managed to have a really great time. We listened to a lot of great music. We partied pretty hard, but he was just far better at applying himself to study than I was. But I did defer from university for a year after 2 years and went and did a vintage and a year at Capel Vale so that I could learn how to pump wine around and how to work in a vineyard. And I was putting vines in the ground, I was dragging hoses, cleaning presses. For my third year, it was just a whole nother world of understanding. I should have done that before I went to university, to be fair.
And were there any sliding doors moments with regard to where you might have ended up, or was it always going to be back to WA to see what happens next?
No, I came back to WA because Margaret River was on this it was just kind of this quiet whisper at Roseworthy. It was tiny. There was only 8, 10 wineries or something that you could possibly have heard of back then. And I came over and just went, what am I going to do next? I'll do a vintage down in Margaret River, and I got a vintage job at Redgate, and I worked at the local hotel as the bottle shop chick for the summer. And when I started, that was when I realised that, there wasn't a lot of help. I was employed as a cellar hand and there was no winemaker by the time. The owner was sort of a winemaker but not really trained, and he just left everything to me. And I had to pull pumps apart and put them back together again to get them working because there were no tradies down here. There was very little experience. So we just had to learn everything ourselves. And obviously the hotline to AWRI and all that kind of stuff was important. I was in love with being in Margaret River. We were playing volleyball at the beach in the afternoons. There was a beautiful network of young winemakers who'd arrived, Clive Otto, Mark Messenger, Connor Lagan, who was at Xanadu. There was so many crew, and my future husband, who was working at Cullen. So many people that we used to just hang out with and party and made wine. I've made it. And we were crushing 100 tonne, doing this cool stuff, But I was just learning the basics, really. And I wanted to go overseas and do a vintage. So I was 4 years in to Redgate, and I said, I want to go overseas and do a vintage this year. I need to sort of spread my wings and learn a bit more. And Bill Ullinger, who was the owner of Redgate, said to me, I don't think you should come back. I think you should keep going. This was a really critical point in my career because I genuinely thought he was sacking me. And what I didn't understand was I was 24 years old after doing 4 years at Redgate, so young. And he's looking at this young kid going, you've got so much ahead of you, don't get stuck here, But I thought he was saying, go away, we don't want you. So it was a nuance of interpretation that sent me on my way, and I was brokenhearted. I thought, far out, this is going to be really tough for me. I wasn't very good at uni and, couldn't go back to Redgate. And I was supposed to go to Portugal for vintage, and I ended up in Albania. That was also heartbreaking because they'd come 2 years out of communism, and the communists had destroyed so many of their vineyards, their olive trees, their forests. So I came out of that heartbroken as well. And it was a really, really hard battle from there. And I think that informed me. Everywhere I went, I just worked so hard to prove myself after that. So I think my hard-working mentality really played into, I had the information behind me by then. I'd learnt so much. University, great contacts at uni. I could call any of my friends and ask them questions. I could call AWRI, I had books, and everything was at my fingertips. All I had to do was work really hard. So I just went on a vintage bandwagon, and I worked a couple of vintages at Cape Mentel, one at Cloudy Bay, but I also was doing vintages in Italy because after going to Albania, Kim Milne felt very guilty. So I was working for Kim Milne. They had a, marketing consultancy group, flying winemakers sent into, I guess, average wineries to try and clean up wine for the UK market. Kim went, that was a pretty shitty experience in Albania. I want to give you one of our better jobs. Where in Europe would you like to go? And I said, Italy. I've always loved Italy. I've loved Italian wines. There's so many varieties I don't understand. There's nothing better than getting immersed in it to learn better. So he said, well, northern Italy is probably a good starting point. Let's get you into the winery in Trento. So I loved it, and it was 2 vintages in Trento. I ended up doing a vintage in Sicily, in Trapani, and then one in Abruzzo with Farnese. In between doing Cape Mentelle, Cloudy Bay, and life was really good, really good. Until I needed to unpack my suitcase, and I really wanted to unpack my suitcase in Margaret River because they were just the most beautiful days of ocean, forest, beautiful wines, great people, great friends. So Margaret River became, sort of my heart and soul. It was where I wanted to lay my hat.
So roughly what era are we talking that you returned from Italy and you finally got around to unpacking that suitcase?
98, I got a job at a contract winemaker making facility. It was like growth of Australian wine, where there was management investment schemes all over the country, grapes getting grown, no one's processing it. So we set up a processing facility and started making wine for wineries in Western Australia and wineries in South Australia with West Australian fruit.
And at that stage, having had quite a lot of different learning experiences, some obviously better than others, did you feel that you had found your feet and you did have confidence then and you knew roughly where you were going, or was it just a case of knuckling down again but with more skill and more experience?
I think it was still knuckling down, and I really had to prove myself in a more senior sort of role that I could handle the management and winemaking, and it didn't matter where at that point. I didn't have the confidence that I would be, the high-end winemaker. I just thought that I would just be a good winemaker and that would be enough. What I visualised it took to be a good winemaker ended up crafting me into being a better winemaker than I ever dreamt I would be. All these little pieces sort of came for me to end up being quite strong-minded about what I liked and what I didn't like. I mean, I guess if you ask my parents, they would probably say I was always quite clear about that. But I think it was that contract winemaking, knuckle down. And look, I did stupid hours trying to make that place work. A 21-hour shift, go home for 3 hours sleep, go back and do another 18 hours, then back for a 5 or 6 hours sleep, then back for another 20 hours, just to keep this place ticking over and make sure that we didn't stuff up, that we succeeded. And man, we did not drop the ball. We didn't fail on one wine. And that gives you a taste of success. And that my hard-working mentality got me there. I mean, I look at it now and go, that was just outright stupid. Probably should have died driving to work and back again or something because I was so tired. But it's amazing. Humans are resilient. We can do a lot when we feel like we have to.
Did you have a sense at the time of what Australian wine was from both an inside and an outside perspective, and what you liked about it, what you didn't like about the term or its possibilities, and where you saw that potential going?
I reckon from 98, when I came back to Margaret River, I at that time knew that Margaret River was special and unique, and that what I had experienced in South Australia was not the same. And the wines that were being made in South Australia and the biggies better sort of approach was not what I wanted to drink, and it was not what we as a community of winemakers in Margaret River wanted to drink. There was a lot of wines being made in Margaret River through the 90s as well. We were pushing bigger, we were reducing sulphurs and trying to make wines with more texture and more weight, but we're an elegant, it's like a cool climate feel here. We did try and push it and the wines got ugly, and then by the sort of late 90s coming into 2000s, there was a slow transition to evolve. And I reckon by 2004, the wines, we started respecting Cabernet for what Cabernet could be. And then from that point forward, it just got more and more elegant, and we just became more confident in our light-footedness. But I guess through the last 20 years of my Margaret River winemaking career, I've fought very, very hard on the international platform about not being considered Australian wine, because the Australian wine can be it is such a big thing, and most people, let's face it, in the US, UK, it was Buddy Jacobs Creek or Yellowtail. That was Australian wine, and you know what? It still is, and that's okay. But there is Australian wine in the sort of branded commodity sector, but then there's premium Australian wine that comes out of regions that have personality and character and a sense of place. And wine is not great unless it has something distinct about it that makes you hunt for it, search for it, and conjure memories. And we know that, smell. Smell goes straight to memory and emotion. It bypasses all these other parts of your brain. If you go into that part of the smells and flavours of wine, then wine can take you to a place that you really want. A drink is a drink, booze is booze. I don't ever want to make just booze. It's not about that. We want to make something that really does conjure feeling, emotion, and gives you that sense of joy and happiness. That's the greatest thing about wine. It's why humans have been embedded in wine and enjoyed wine for thousands of years, and it's been part of our humanity.
Yeah, and you have obviously found an opportunity to explore that to the nth degree at Vasse Felix, but just tell us how that opportunity arose in the first place, because it was a little bit out of the blue.
It was... Getting the job at Vasse Felix is something I never imagined would have happened. It was the greatest blessing I could have hoped for. From going at the contract winemaking facility, that then got sold to Evans and Tate. I worked at the Evans and Tate, which was just turning into a big monster. And then I had an opportunity with Mike Kalneja, who started the contract facility, to start making boutique wines. And he had 3 small boutique wineries. And when I started pulling those 3 little wineries apart and looking at all those wines and being the group winemaker for all 3, it was a great lesson in trying to understand what made those personalities so different yet good. That was only 3 years of looking after those wineries before the opportunity at Vasse Felix came up. And I'd experienced a lot of West Australian fruit at that point through contract winemaking, through Evans and Tate, and through this boutique winemaking world. There were 2 wineries in Margaret River and 1 in Manjimup. And I think I had a really great understanding of the personality of different regions, sub-regions, properties, plots, varieties, what worked well in WA. The job at Vasse Felix came up, and it was one of those things that I always spoke to my husband about. It's like, there's only really 4 or 5 jobs you'd really want here in Margaret River, and Vasse Felix was one of them, because there was potential, but there was also a good grounding of success behind it, so you could grow from there. And when I got that job, it was just like, oh, jeez, this is going to be a real challenge. And I remember travelling through Spain with a girlfriend of mine, Vanessa Carson, and we were going through, and I was just shitting myself. I sort of finished my job as a group winemaker for Australian Wine Holdings, and I had 4 weeks off. We travelled through Spain. I'm going, I don't know what I want to do for Vasse Felix yet. I know that they've got the greatest old vines, and I need to make sure that they shine, because I was always disturbed that Vasse Felix had the oldest vines in the region. I couldn't taste them as a unique entity. That bothered me a little bit. But then I walked into Rhoda one day, and I looked at all these barrels, and they were all painted and beautiful, and they had Rhoda and Rhoda 1 back then, and they talked about the different styles of Tempranillo that they were making and what really changed them. And that little moment was like, I want my cellar to look like this, and I want my wines to be as pure and distinct as these 2 wines. And it's the same variety, and I love them both, but they conjured up different feelings. And it was quite a special moment, and I think that was when I just went, that's it. I know I've got a starting point at Vasse Felix. I didn't realise at that point, I suppose, that Chardonnay was going to be the thing that we would turn around first, and that Tom Cullity would come later. But it was a really beautiful moment, and it's 19 years at Vasse Felix now, and the journey, I don't even know when it's going to end, because every year I do something, I feel like there's more to do, because I feel like we're only just at that early stage of monks. Like I talk to a lot of people about being, we in my generation are the modern Margaret River monks. It is our job to find the Grand Cru, the Premier Cru and the Village, and we're on that journey, and we need to just keep pushing that journey as hard as we can to help the next generation make Margaret River even better again. And that's, that's the generosity of legacy, I suppose, that you want to leave behind. It's not me, it's the region that I want to leave in a better place. It's a region that I'm very passionate about. It's, it's a deep love that you have for the land here. You can't help it when you live here.
So with Chardonnay then, how did that turnaround look? What did you discover in terms of your monkish search for great land, great plots, great potential, and how did you turn that fruit into ever greater wines under Vasse Felix?
I think just about every great winemaking mate of mine says the same thing. It's the art of doing less that creates more. And when you can find out what fruits truly like, that's when you discover the great plots. So I think the journey was allowing as much cloudy juice to barrel and letting the wild yeast do their story. So the wild yeast to me were a critical part of the story. And everyone kept saying, oh, that's bullshit, Virginia, you don't know what you're talking about. It's only the Saccharomyces cerevisiae that finish to those alcohol contents. You may as well inoculate. And I'm like, are we being told this by supply companies, or is this, what I'm seeing in the barrel is completely different? So we fermented everything separately, every little plot separately, and we still do to this day. Cabernet, Chardonnay, every little plot is fermented separately, because that's the story that we need to understand, whether that plot should stay in the ground, whether it should be something else, or whether it should never be planted again. This is the journey that we must embark on. Now, that takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of batches in our winery, and you have to assess every batch, and you've got to make sure every batch is as good as it can be, and then the true Grand Cru shines and the Premier Cru shines. So I think the wild yeast is a very strong part of the story, because wild yeast population and health creates a beautiful wine. Fermenting cloudy gave us personality. Let's say, when I was at Roseworthy, we were taught sulphides were a fault, and there was not an in-betweeny. If there was some there, it was faulty. There was none there, you're fine. But sulphides are beautiful. They're an important part of our complexity wines. So we ended up finding our little Grand Cru plots through allowing each little natural plot to shine, and we found certain personalities within plots that did it year in, year out, and they became classifiable, I guess. I suppose that journey continues through Cabernet, through everything we do, and we're planting more new plots. We're discovering, and as they get older, they change. So you've got to watch them grow, you've got to watch them evolve. Some people are very successful teenagers and then can't get a job when they're adults. We see that as in grapevines as well. They look fantastic through their middle age, and then they sort of grow into a stable age where they just really don't do that much at all. And you go, oh, well, maybe you're a Premier or Village at best. So the journey needs to keep continuing.
Yeah, we use that word personality. I think that's quite an important one in describing the allure of your wines, especially at that top level where Heytesbury, for example, in the Chardonnay world, has been allowed to express itself, not just vintage to vintage, but also that slightly more individualistic personality of the wine. What do you see as the things that crop up in Heytesbury that excite you, that might not be the same every time, but they're part of the same personality?
Yeah, look, they are pretty close to the same every time. In fact, literally, we finalised our 2025 Heytesbury today. Last week was blending all week, and we're looking at every little plot. Then you start pulling the barrels together, and if you just go one barrel more of new oak, it can mask these characters. But the character of Heytesbury, to me, every year we see it blind on the bench. The blocks that produce this character are the same every year, and I like to call it like a lamb fat herb chicken stock. This is when they're young wines, when we're blending. If they don't have that sort of lamb fat, clotted cream, sort of a herb chicken stock, it's not Heytesbury. It's it just doesn't make the grade. But it's always there in the same plots every year. And I think it's not just the fruit. Well, it is the fruit ripening. They're quite slow ripening. It's 100% ginging clone, but it's the wild yeast that interacts with that fruit ripeness that we seem to get every year. And that's something that I think is a really important thing to discover. Now, that's a palate personality that we worked out that happens to be an endearing character that other people love too. But it's like that old classic comment, what is it, Henrik's gin, it's not for everyone. And I remember Paul Holmes at Court, which was a fantastic thing from him. Somebody had said, look, I'm not sure it's from everyone. And Paul got so excited about it. He just said, well, this is our top wine. This is the best we do. There's not enough for everyone. And he just went, that's what it should be, And it was that distinct, clear personality that if you're going to pay a lot for a bottle of wine, you want it to have a distinct personality that you can't get in an average bottle of wine. So personality is super important.
I totally agree. And what about the Cabernet then? What's been the journey with Cabernet Sauvignon in terms of getting it towards your vision for that grape variety?
Oh, again, it's a bit of a serendipitous clonal story as well. We have pushed the lighter, balanced style of Cabernet probably longer than most people have. I mean, Xanadu's won every trophy everywhere in the country for the last 10 years, and it's an elegant, lighter style of Cabernet. And it's like, why are people still thinking that Cabernet needs to be this monster when it's not? It is a very powerful, fragrant variety. The most powerful fragrant red variety. Restraint is what we try and obtain with Cabernet. But I think tonality is the thing that's taught me the greatest lesson. When you look at the old vines and go, who are they? What story are they telling? They've been in the ground longer than anyone else. They've never been irrigated. We've never over-manipulated them. They're just healthy, beautiful vines that have continued for 58 years now, and they're in rude health. They love where they are, and they produce one of the most elegant, plump, succulent Cabernets. And when you look at that and you go, we were gifted that, and that's what it looks like with very little canopy management, very great art form. Our viticulturists and I've worked on over years to make sure the vines produce consistent crop every year and consistent ripeness. But the elegance of those blocks have taught us that it's okay. And beyond just being okay, it's beautiful and it's fragrant and it's a magnificent drink. And you don't have to be the biggest to be the best, to be the most sublime and complex and intricate. And I fell in love with Cabernet so much more when we found Tom and the old vines with Malbec. The Malbec is a strong part of it as well. But we were gifted that, in WA from the 1850s, and now it's here in Margaret River. And we blend those two together, and all of a sudden you've got this bloody amazing wine that has the most incredible history, story and legacy that the world has to offer in wine. And it's here in Margaret River, and I'm like, wow. Every time I try and tell the story, I go, is it really this big a story? I think it is. I really do. And Andrew Kayard, through the Wine Arc and things like that, he gets it. He gets emotional about it, and it's something that I think we forget about that beauty of wine, is that the story is so long, the history is so long, and the wine is the gift that we were given where it is. I mean, you might argue that you shouldn't be growing Semillon in Hunter Valley, but their gift is that they found it and they made it something that's their own, and that's their story. We have, albeit I think that Tom Cullity is a greater story than Hunter Semillon. It is a remarkable, incredible story that has a long and beautiful history, but better than that, it's one of the greatest examples of delicious Cabernet that you can have in this world. And I don't reckon people have even recognised that yet. I feel like Bordeaux is starting to work out that elegant form is back in again, and that's all starting to work. But I feel like we're ahead of the curve because, to be honest, we've never had to power up for anyone. We never had to deal with the Parker era because Parker never scored our wines in Margaret River. No one really cared about it. Most West Australians have got European palates, not Australian palates. A lot of people think West Australians have cellar palates, and maybe we do, but maybe that's a sustainable and beautiful way of creating something so unique. And that's what makes people want to come to that unique place, because it has its own unique community of winemakers and wine style and stuff that this community loves to drink.
Yeah, and speaking of uniqueness, I think in wine we can't help sometimes make generalisations and use shorthand, which I think often comes back to bite us when trying to convey detail. And although you say that English is your second language, I've heard you speak very articulately about the detail in Margaret River, not just about regional and sub-regional differences, even more finely tuned site differences in Margaret River, but also about climate too, because a lot of the time that idea that there's a vintage report that can encapsulate what happened across the area. There was a nice quote where you were talking about the human experience of temperature, how the temperature gauge tells us it's this hot, but it feels this hot to us. And over a vine's experience of a season, those feels likes make a big difference to the end result. Tell us what we should know about the finer points of Margaret River's climate and regional/site differences that are exciting, especially with the context of Chardonnay and Cabernet.
You know, Gladstone's was such a brilliant man, you know, drew the line, albeit with a ruler for the Cape, you know. But when they talked about the sub-regions and things like that, he talked about airflow systems, and that's how he sort of mapped it out in a basic form. I don't think it's as simple as just the airflow systems at all. I mean, so many people don't understand about Margaret River is that it's such old land. There's no volcanoes, earthquakes, floods, you know, there's been no signs of drought. We've had no extreme heat, no extreme cold temperatures. We're so moderated by the ocean. There's a wilderness out there in the ocean, and it really influences everything that we feel here. And I think most people go, you can't grow Cabernet and Chardonnay in the same spot. Napa probably tried to do it, but the ocean breeze that we have, and that feels like, is the thing that allows us to grow Chardonnay and Cabernet in the same place. Cabernet ripens, but it has this cooling breeze. So it's got sunshine to ripen, but it's got cooling breeze to give it long time, no currents. And Chardonnay is ripe early in the season, but that cooling breeze makes it taste cool climate. And we've got a clonal influence. A lot of people talk about Margaret River being wine paradise and this, you know, amazing place, but it's windy. It's very windy here in Western Australia. If you don't like wind, it's not the place for you, you know. The afternoon sea breeze, while it might be a bit annoying if you want to go to the beach, you go to the beach in the morning and it is beautiful. Offshore breeze, it's stunning, but mid-morning there's a breeze that comes off the ocean, and we've got a long west coast. The beach is no fun. But what it means to agriculture here is so great. It takes that hydraulic pressure out of the grapevines. It stops them being so hot and trying to cool themselves all afternoon and demanding more water. They're cool enough, the fruit's cool enough. That beautiful cooling temperature keeps us energetic, it keeps them energetic. And I think you need to have living energy in your vine, but you need living energy in your people to get through vintage as well. And I think a lot of people talk about the energy of the people in this community. It comes through in the wine. We are powered by wind here. The fruit is powered by wind, cooling breeze, and the people are powered by this freshness through the summer months, you know. And I think it creates a different style of wine. It creates a different lifestyle. you know. We're morning people. People talk about West Australians not having daylight savings. They think we're all morons. I mean, admittedly, there's a few reasons why that people made up early in the day that make it sound pretty bad. But at the end of the day in Western Australia, you want to get up when the sun gets up, which, you know, it's nearly 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning in summer. You want to do as much as you can before you go to work. Then when you go to work, it's windy, it's cool, it's beautiful. You can work through the day, but you've had a beautiful morning. It's not about, you know, having the afternoon off, because the afternoon, the beach is shit. So it's a lifestyle choice. We are a different people here, I think. And I think that's okay. I'm not saying that we're better. I'm just saying we're different.
Yeah, speaking about the energy of people, tell us a little bit about the community of winemakers/wine growers that feed into your understanding of the gifts of that area and perhaps bring out competitive edge as well, because you're all making such good wines. Who are the people that you're kind of talking to and getting a bit of energy from?
Oh, there's just so many beautiful winemakers around here. I mean, Glenn Goodall, Julian Langworthy, who are the best competitors in the region, the King of the North and King of the South. Glenn calls me the Queen of Cabernet. Bruce Jukes at Naturalist Vintners, who's just the quirkiest, coolest dude. You've got the new young blood coming on stream with Japo down at McHenry Honan. A little bit of Italian blood's always good. Joe Perry at Dormalona brings this creative, beautiful energy. And you talk about natural wine, but she's got talent. She makes clean natural wine. And Dylan out at LS Merchant, cool stuff. DJ, great atmosphere, beautiful community of people working with him. It's just full of great young people doing great stuff. And look, the old guard, none of us are laying back on our laurels and acting old. I think we're all, you know, we're still full of energy and still full of life and love for what we do. So it is amazing. And we hang with each other a lot. Like every year we do a Cabernet tasting and a Chardonnay tasting at Vasse Felix, and everyone comes. Everyone enjoys tasting each other's wines and catching up, and it just feels like there's so much love in the room when you do that. Love and energy to be better because we're so young, and it's usually a beautiful day and everyone is just so grateful to be living in this region and have a job in this region and have people who are supporting what we do and we're supporting what they want to do. Like, I wouldn't be anywhere I am now without Paul Holmes à Court and the love I have for this business and his family and what they're doing for this region. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, speaking of, you're coming up on 20 years at Vasse Felix, and you and Paul have obviously struck up an incredible partnership. We don't necessarily hear that much about Paul. What are his strengths and how do you two fit with the chemistry of the business?
I think one of the greatest things about Paul is he's got an agricultural bone in his body and he's got a beautiful creative mind. But he also is commercially smart. So, I mean, you look at his mum and his dad. You know, his dad was Australia's first billionaire, corporate developer. His mum is just so passionate about the arts and music, and she has this incredible talent for the arts. And Paul is somewhere in between there. And they managed to keep a hold of the cattle stations up north, the wine down here. They used to have a horse stud where Paul's dad bred racehorses. That's now a cattle stud as well. And Paul understands agriculture. He understands seasons. And I think if you're in wine and you don't understand agriculture, you're never going to be happy. But he understands, and he's got this patience and being able to ride through the times, and he's a calming and positive influence on the whole business, and he's so passionate about Margaret River. I used to think I was the person in love with Margaret River more, but now I feel like Paul's trying to outdo me with how much he loves Margaret River, where he's gone and bought the Margaret River Hotel and he's renovating a 90-year-old beautiful hotel to be something really special in the middle of town. It's got a sparkling wine house, Ide Fix down south, all because he believes in Margaret River as a wine growing region more than you could possibly believe. And he believes in its success, but not just 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. He's got 5 kids. He wants to see that through generations that this wine industry will survive and the wineries will be a beautiful legacy that he was a big part of building and growing and supporting. The humbleness and the kindness that he has to, the lack of ego, I suppose, for the family brand and things like that. Like when he decided to let go of Heytesbury Red and create Tom Cullity for the legacy of the man's name, to drop a family name off the top wine and give it to Tom, I think it was just a really clear line of who he is as a person. It's about the long-term legacy from the start to generations into the future, not just about him in his time. We've got a lot of respect. We've had a roller coaster of a relationship because, there'd be times where he'd think I'm not doing the right thing and, I'd think he was on this commercial bandwagon. But over time, the trust that we have in our journey together and what we actually want to bring to this journey, to Vasse Felix, the brand, couldn't be stronger. Paul doesn't trust people easily, like even just to the point of you don't spend Paul's money on winery assets and new stuff without gaining his trust. And it took years to gain that trust, to get some new toys that he didn't think that I was just being a wanker buying, But we're now on the journey together and we just have an open conversation and he's totally fine saying, no, I think that's bollocks, Ginny, we need to think of another way of doing it. I believe that, I don't believe in that. Or, your argument's a bit weak and you go, yeah, okay, fair enough, it's true.
There's obviously been a lot of talk about the quality of the wines. What a lot of people don't see is what's happening behind the scenes in terms of business. And Tim Sham was on the podcast a little while ago saying really about every facet of the Vasse Felix business that seems to just work really well as a model for other people. What are the things that you're proud of that you see working as a holistic business around you beyond the wines?
Oh, I guess the sense of integrity and truth. And I used to laugh at Paul and just say that, he's grown up an atheist in his family, but his chief viticulturalist and his chief winemaker both grew up Catholics and we can't lie. There's a real truth to what we do. So every time we talk about our wines and we talk about what we do, we need to tell the truth. And that means coming out of the winery, through the marketing guys, at the face of the cellar door, through the vineyards. There's just no bullshit. We don't want bullshit. But if we want to tell a story like our wine comes from here, and it needs to be true. And I think the journey for Paul and I, when I first started at Vasse Felix, we had 11 hectares in Williabrup and 150 hectares in Carbonup, and we bought 40% of the fruit in. We're now 100% self-sufficient, and we're, just over 50 hectares in Williabrup and over 100 hectares in Wallcliffe, and every plot that we purchased is better than we could ever buy from anyone else because we control it all. And the journey is we just have to have the story within our hearts and understand everything that we do has got to be transparent. And I think that's something that Paul believes in. Bart and I are very true to ourselves and what we believe in and what we want to make real. I think that's the essence of a great wine business. The moment someone starts bullshitting up the front end and then the winemaking and viticultural team are trying to, catch up and play around the background to make it true, it doesn't work. You got to believe in what you do and then that story becomes real. Or if you're doing something, just be honest about it, you know, and everyone's happy with that. So integrity is I know that's a bit of a cliche, but there's no question that is a really strong part of what we do. I mean, Lloyd, our sales and marketing manager, was an absolute godsend as well. Very creative, thoughtful brain that really helps where we place ourselves as wine comes from a philosophical background, not from a superficial foreground. Every single person who works in the business, their heart and soul is part of the company heart and soul, which then creates the story which interlock with each other. And Lloyd's really good at pulling those pictures together and then creating the character that is our brand. And our brand is a character, it's a personality, and it comes from all of us.
Yeah, you mentioned in Spain looking at the barrels in Rodda and thinking that there was something there that you could take back home, which I think is a sense of identity and pride, maybe self-esteem as well, which I think is probably important to the team, that they believe in what you're doing, everything you just said, but also that they're part of it, and that outward expression of what you do and how people respect that's important. Do you think that idea of self-worth, self-esteem is really important to the business too?
Oh, without a doubt. You know, I think it was probably one of the greatest cultural shifts I made in the winery when I got there, was to clean everything up. And everyone thought I was a complete nutcase creating this superficial looking winery in a shed. And I'm like, no, we're going to look after our barrels. We're going to paint the middle bands. We're going to stack everything neat. Everything's going to be precision perfect, stacked perfect. And it's like, we're in a dirty old shed, Gin. Why are you trying to make us look fancy? And I'm like, because when you stack those barrels away and they're all painted, you're going to have a moment that goes, look at that. And you nod your head and you feel a sense of achievement. And when you work in a cellar, it's not that easy to feel that sense of achievement. Like, you know, as a winemaker, I'm on the tasting bench smelling and tasting the results of great behaviour. But if you can, as a cellar hand, visualise your great behaviour on the outside, you know that the behaviour is going through the wines as well. And I've got rid of cellar hands who can't paint a barrel properly and can't stack a barrel properly, because if they can't do that, you know they're not doing what's going on the inside properly either. It's a holistic view about who we employ and their sense of pride in work. And everyone has to have their sense of pride in work that shows externally, but internally we can smell and taste it. And that means everything to all of us.
Yes, and I'm sure accolades which have flowed have helped with that idea of self-esteem. But what about you? Have you had that confidence for a long time? Did it stem from being acknowledged from the outside, or did it come from just the excitement of doing a great job?
I don't think I've ever been fully confident. You know, I live in fear of failure. It's a really interesting thing because Paul Holmes at Court, who's a great leader and guide, when we first did well, I think it was when I was nominated for Winemaker of the Year back in 2011, or when I got it in 2012 or something like that. He sent me a really beautiful letter at the end of year and said, what a great year. But the last line he put in my little letter was, beware of hubris. And I've never forgotten that. And I was sort of going, I don't know that I would ever be like that, because I've always lived in a fear of failure. And Paul was also, on the other hand, going, be careful of your fear because it can inhibit your progression. So on one hand, he's saying, beware of hubris, and on the other hand, saying, don't have too much fear. You need to have a bit of courage there. So I don't think I've ever felt like I've made it, and I don't care how many awards you get. There's always something in agriculture that'll kick you in the guts to make you feel real again. You know, you're dealing with nature, and particularly the way I make wine, I don't feel like I'm in control of success. I feel like it is in control of me, and I have to help it be successful. And that means my people, the wines, the juices, the grapes, all that kind of stuff. So I don't feel like the success is mine. at all. I don't think I ever have. I've never felt really worthy, or like that a winemaker of the year thing is like a, yay, I've made it. The greatest thing I think this year wasn't as much you get a winemaker of the year and it just makes you feel like, so spending all these really hard years of just caring for these wines and putting your heart and soul into it is worthwhile. That's the feeling I get from great awards and accolades. But releasing 10 years of Tom Cullity, which was a beautiful moment from 20 years ago when Paul and I decided that these grapes needed to be something more. It took us till 2013 to make a wine that was Tom Cullity, and then 10 years later it's like, how did we get 10 years in? We've actually done something we tried to do, and it's something that's successful enough that it's worth continuing to do. That to me is a real feeling of success.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw you in real life, which might actually to this day be the only time, was at Savour Australia back in 2013 or whenever it was. It was a Cabernet masterclass. We were all given sheets of which breakout rooms we were going to, and I went to a Cabernet tasting with you, and Sue Hodder was on the panel as well. And it was the first time I'd heard you speak as well, actually. And I was so struck at just the refreshing candour of the way that you spoke about wines. Very down to earth. So when you talk about that truthfulness of what you're doing, I feel like that candour was the way you've expressed yourself forever. Do you feel like that's always been taken the right way by other people?
Yeah, probably not. I don't actually know. The amount of times I swear can actually probably put a few people off. But even someone like Lloyd, our sales and marketing manager, I'm like, oh my God, Lloyd, I'm so sorry in front of these really important people. I swore twice. And he said, Ginny, I think it's just your brand a little bit sweary, And I've always believed that everyone's got a little bit of bogan in them. It just depends on how much they let show. And I just happen to let a little bit more show than most people. And that just goes into the truth of who I am. I'm a bit loose and I'm a bit charged. I'm passionate. I'm energetic. A bit annoying probably sometimes because I speak incessantly. And particularly, to my crew, I speak out loud. I'm an extroverted thinker. So one of the most challenging things I reckon through my career was with Bart, our viticulturalist, who is like, he's now like my brother, but when we first started working with each other, I used to go, from a viticultural point of view, we really need to get this sorted out. We can do this, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And I'd probably say 5 different things about what we could do. And then I go, so what do you reckon, Bart? It probably should be this, shouldn't it? And he was like a rabbit in the headlights going, oh God, all right. But what I didn't realise was that at the end of the day, it turned out like I was telling him what to do. I'd suggested every way, then I told him what to do. But because he's an introverted thinker, he couldn't actually work out, he needed time to process all of these ideas because I'm just a million miles a minute. And it took him a while, and I learnt that that's the way he was. And I went, but do you want to think about this overnight and we'll catch up tomorrow and we'll work out what we're going to do? And then the next day he'd come in and go, I reckon that's a really good idea, but what if we did this? And you go, oh, it's even better. So we ended up being so much better. So I had to learn a lot about controlling all the shit that was coming out of my mouth and what it meant to other people. And it took me, God, till I'm in my late 40s to work out that not everybody responded really well to how much was coming out of my mouth. And I've now learnt that you've just got to let some people sit on it for a bit. I've now got, a new senior winemaker who's a really quiet, introverted sort of person. And I need those sort of people in my life because I'm so full on. Like as a team, we're amazing because he's really cool and calm with the crew. I'm like blah, 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 blah. He keeps things cool. I give them energy and it works really beautifully. But the moment he came in and started working with me, I knew he needed time to process all the stuff. And I just went, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I've probably given you enough information. Let's finalise this tomorrow. It'll be great. And that's just growing up. Some people don't ever understand that about themselves or other people, but some people probably learn a little earlier than I did. So, life goes on.
As we said, coming up for the 20 years of Vasse Felix, I feel still with every bit of mojo that you ever had for that position, every bit of excitement that you ever had, plus more about what the future can hold. It's not necessarily something that the wine world is particularly good at imparting to other people, this enthusiasm. I mean, it's wildly exciting, isn't it? The way that you love what you've got, you love the place that you're in, and the possibilities when you look at it from different angles just seem endless. What could we do better to infuse other people with that same joy of growing things and the places where they grow and the people and the things that came together to make that happen?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot, and I genuinely am concerned for the next generations of people who are, young crew who are so disconnected from the land. And I don't mean phones and things like that, but just the sheer number of people all over the world who are moving to cities, out of agricultural regions and into cities because that's where they can make money. Maybe I'm a bit of a survivalist, but I'm a firm believer that humans only need food, shelter and each other to survive. So, and food, I mean water, and wine's included there, So if you only need those three things, and young people are taught that those are the only three things that you have to primarily understand, everything else doesn't matter. So maybe it's a year of agriculture before you go to university. You cannot go to university without doing a year on a farm. Imagine how productive our farms could be and how connected everyone would be, that they understand that their food comes from somewhere. It's that genuine city disconnect that really worries me about humanity, There's no question that staring into the ocean, sitting in the forest, a human being will feel better for having had that happen to them. We've just got to get out there and we've got to teach young people how to be a part of the wilderness and agriculture, because we need to make food. And when you understand how food is made and the lack of processing actually required to pluck a tomato from a bush and eat it, to get a bunch of grapes and ferment it, that wine becomes the thing that's the closest natural alcoholic beverage known to humanity. If you were going to choose an alcoholic beverage into the next century, it has to be wine, because it's the most sustainable produce you can have.
Well, last question. I'm going to ask you a very perhaps cliche podcast question, but I'm just so interested to hear your answer. To take that most magnificent of beverages, who outside the world of wine would you most like to meet and pour a glass of your wine with and have a chat to?
Oh, God, you did give me warning about something like this, but I am Tom Waits.
Elaborate.
I just really, from his poetry, his deep thinking, I just love that dirgy soul that he's got. And I just think that if I can connect a dirgy soul that can create poetry and music like that with a glass of wine, yeah, I'd be pretty happy.
And that's it for this week's podcast. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and share it everywhere. Please don't underestimate the power of these endorsements in making it possible to produce original, thoughtful work. You can also subscribe to my Substack. That's edmerison.substack.com. But now, I'd like to say thank you to Lucas James for the music, Neil Williams for the artwork, Patricio Garcia for the edits, and to my guest, Virginia Willcock. Till next time, live wine to the fullest. Cheers.